So we moving on to the next slide. Last week we started to talk on world politics. This is a book by an author called Organski. Organski is a very interesting figure because he not only talked about what we understand by terms such as international relations, power within the domain of international relations, but also the relationships between states, but also their domestic politics. So he made a science. He tried to formulate a theory which didn't really work out well, but he based his theory on what we call the modernization theory. So we will be talking about the modernization theory as well a little bit today. Okay, so on the essay, I gave you last week, for this course, there is a practical assignment, and I gave you this. If you look at the slide, beneath that slide, you see there is this in bold, against the liberal and capitalist democratic global enthusiasm question. So that kind of is an attempt to encourage you to write an essay on this topic. So the question is, why are social democratic political parties in the West, especially in Western Europe, shrinking? And about the deadline, I talked to the department, but they will let you know from the department when the deadline is. I don't expect it anywhere in the next couple of weeks. I think it will be somewhere. That's my personal judgment. I hope it will be somewhere in December, so you will have the time to write your essay, because there's a compulsory part in your course that you have to write a practical assignment. So this is going to be your practical assignment. 2,000 words is not much, but I expect you to read literature, books, and gather information and try to look at the question from an analytical perspective that you're going to discuss, debate in your essay. And then I said, if you want me to talk about how to add footnotes to your essay, there's a very, very easy trick to work with footnotes and endnotes. I made a video on that, and it's on my YouTube channel. If you're interested, I can send you the link to the video, and you can watch that step by step, how you can work complicated essays like research, big research with, if you're using, if you're doing a research of a couple of hundred pages, Zotero really helps you out and preventing major shifts in your essay. So I can send you that link. Having said that, last week we started talking on Organski, and Organski kind of takes us, if you did have the time, the chance to look at the book. It's a very big book, but yes, I will send you the link by email right after the lecture, so you can watch that video. You can also share that with your friends if you like. So I don't mind that. And if you want to subscribe to my channel, that's okay too. And he starts to okay, no problem. No problem. I'm happy with you. I'm very happy with you, and you're very dedicated. You're a very good student, and you join our classes every Friday evening. I think that's very good. You're going to be very successful, inshallah, in the future. I really like that. So I'm very happy with you, and I hope that you will benefit from this knowledge, and that you will become a good scholar in the international relations and political sciences. So, Meltem, we will continue because we only have 1 hour to talk about this, and we have a lot of material. So, Organski, he's a very interesting person because he wrote this book in 1957, but he makes a very courageous, very bold prediction. And he starts in his book by with the theory of modernization. He starts to talk about nationalism and what nationalism acts. And he talked about these phases. He talked about the phases of modernization, right? And his first stage was primitive unification, and that was from the Middle Ages to the mercantilist capitalist system. And somewhere after the primitive unification, there is the second stage, which is the industrialization. That's 1750s. And after that, in the 19th century, we have the national welfare. And if you're lucky as a nation, as a state, you will reach stage 4 in Organski's theory, which is abundance. Abundance means that's abundant for everyone in society within the state. So we talked about these stages because this lecture is going to be quite interesting for you. And then we talked about that Organski believes that every nation has the need, the natural need to be able to free of external control. So every nation in a way wants to be independent and be able to decide and control its own fate, national fate, right? So he says a little bit of power, even though it's minimum amount of power is necessary to be able to realize the illusion of nationhood. And he says, if you don't have that minimum amount of power, we're going to talk about power today. If you don't have that minimum amount of power, then and if you cannot control your own domestic affairs, then this nationhood, being a nation state, is a dream, is an illusion. So he says a little bit of power is important. It is also very useful to have power, because if you have it, then it's also very, very practical and functional in achieving your own national desires, aims, and national goals if you have them. And every nation has them, right? So power, in other words, for Organski is important to reach as means to reach your goals. And we talked about the theory of modernization, and the theory of modernization puts a relationship between economy and politics. So there is a relationship between modernization of your industry and a correlation with the modernization of your political system. So having said that, Organski really uses the modernization theory. So if you look at the first chapters in the book, Organski bases his theory on the theory of modernization. And basically the theory of modernization is actually the construction of these two things, which is basically what we talked about last week, which is the Industrial Revolution, which started in 1750s in the United Kingdom, and it slowly transferred into migration of people into cities and them working in factories, which triggered the middle class and the working class to ask for more freedoms and rights by way of the French Revolution. So economy, he says, and politics So there is this theory of modernization, and then he tries to make us think in his book if this formula, if this model could be replicated for other countries as well. And he tries to discuss that this could be done, but it's very unique to the Western countries like the United Kingdom. And he gives an example that the United Kingdom was the most powerful country in the world before the United States became the superpower, global superpower. So the United Kingdom was the most powerful power in the world, and it was just because of the fact that it was the only country that was industrialized. And we see, and Organski says, suddenly there was a transfer of power from the United Kingdom to the United States, and the gap between United Kingdom and the rest of the countries, because United Kingdom started to lose power around the globe. It was becoming less and less powerful. It was because other countries were becoming industrialized as well. So the gap was closing, and the United States becoming more industrialized. It started to transfer the power from United Kingdom to the United States. That's the story that Organski is telling us. And but he says, in this theory of modernization, he says, how is it possible that the United Kingdom, it took the United Kingdom a very slow process of industrialization, and then also a very slow process of democratization, political changes in the country. But how is it possible that this country, United Kingdom, became one of the significant countries and transferring that power to the United States? And he says, well, it has to do with not only the economic changes, not only the political and economic changes, but also a very essential ingredient, which was the argument of efficiency. So the United Kingdom had somehow figured out how to make the production level in its own domestic country, in its own country within the boundaries, to make it very, very efficient. So he says, if a country is industrialized, it means that they have become very efficient in organizing the production level. And then he takes us actually into a discussion between, is this only possible for democratic countries? He says, well, actually it doesn't. It doesn't mean that you should be, as a country, a democracy, because there are many authoritarian countries, and the Soviet Union would be one of the most important ones that was an authoritarian country, but it reached an efficient level of industrialization. The problem with Soviet Union was the fact that the Soviet Union could not keep up with generating enough wealth to increase the standard of living for its own people. So that was a big problem. And as you know, the Soviet Union and the United States were struggling in the Cold War, and producing a military capacity requires a lot of capital. So the Soviet Union was the problem with the Soviet Union, and the difference with the United States was that the United States had a very diversified economy. So a diversified economy means that the economy in America was producing many different products: cars, machines, technology, oil, gas, gold. So it was so diversified that the economy was not only dependent on one product, such as in the Soviet Union. And the biggest problem of the Soviet Union was they were able to industrialize very, very fast, because there was a lot of pressure from the authoritarian regime to industrialize, to take farmers from villages into factories, but it was forced. And they were able to industrialize very fast, but they were not able to provide high standards of living. So there was poverty. And then imagine them also investing all heavily into military and missiles and atomic bombs and technology. With the space war competition with the United States, they were not able to keep up. In 1978, when they went into Afghanistan for war, the war made them go bankrupt. So you see, there is this debate going on. On one side, also authoritarian countries can achieve a high level of efficiency. Yes, military industrial complex. They can achieve high economic efficiency, military efficiency, but they need to be able to do this efficiently. And also very important, the economy should be diversified. So if you see a country that is unable to achieve a diversified economy, it's not going to benefit the country, because Soviet Union is very, very much oil dependent country. So as you can see on this slide, there is a difference between a diverse economy and the oil-cursed countries such as the Soviet Union. So you would ask the same question, but for example, China is also an authoritarian country, but the difference with the Soviet Union, between Soviet Union and China, is the fact that the Chinese economy is very, very diversified, and they are able to produce a lot of different kinds of products. And one of the main reasons that Soviet Union actually lost the battle against the United States had to do with the inability, not being able to shift their economy into a diversified economy. Because you need money to invest into technology, you need money to invest in the living standards of your people. And by the time in 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, people wanted to become democracies because they wanted jobs, they wanted money to be able to go to the supermarket and buy things. And at that time, the supermarkets were empty. People were not able to buy their basic needs of basic products that they needed for their daily lives. And Organski says, and then he starts talking about power. And he says, he makes us, while we're reading, he makes us think about power. And he says, well, is it because this is a big debate in international relations, is it because the human nature, the universal human drive, is it because it requires power? I mean, are we as individuals, people, every single individual, from a realist, school of thought, it claims, it argues that people are born, they come into this world with this inborn urge to have power. So realists like, Thomas Hobbes is very famous. His book Leviathan is very famous. And he talks about constant fear, the natural state. The natural state is a place where people live in fear. And there is always the threat of another person being stronger and coming and taking your stuff away. Your life, maybe your family, your house. And there is always this constant threat from this realist school of thought. And, Thomas Hobbes says that we have to be in a constant fear and on a constant lookout that we should be able to protect ourselves. And so realist school of thought says states should be constantly ready for war. If something happens, and this was the case, when we had this bipolar world, the United States on one side and the Soviet Union on the other side, when we had the Cold War, you could somehow argue that the realist school of thought was right. I mean, people were afraid. When you go to the United States, you see a lot of people who have bunkers under the ground, and against, as a precautions, they call them the preppers. And these people, there are millions of preppers in the United States who were really, really afraid, who are afraid that an atomic bomb could go off, and so they prepare for the big, winter. Nuclear winter, to go under the ground and hide there, and they stock food and water and things like that. And people were really afraid at that time. But you know what the problem with the realist school of thought is? That realism cannot predict, or was not able to predict, why the Cold War ended. Realism can explain why there is competition, because it says because the human being is universally always afraid, should always be afraid. So there is always another person, maybe another state that is stronger and could conquer you or could invade you. But Organski says, I mean, how do you then explain, as a realist school, that the Cold War ended suddenly? It just suddenly ended. I mean, there was no indication. In 1990, 1989 and 1990, it just ended. The Soviet Union stopped existing. But how do you explain that? So Organski says, well, it sounds very nice, but if this theory was right, then there wouldn't be peace all the time. Most of the time there is peace. Sometimes there is war, but most of the time there is peace. So it doesn't really match with this constant given fear of the people, because we're not always afraid. I mean, most of the time we live in great peace, and we're confident that there is going to be peace. And this is another point that Organski makes in his book. So power, according to realists, is about being strong, as in being able to deter. Deter is to fight off. So when someone says deterring, means when you come show me a big stick, I show you a bigger stick. And when you see that I'm stronger, so you back off. That's what happened in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy said to Khrushchev, go back to your country if you go. Exactly. Very good. So it's to deter. But this is, Meltem, this is a very important point, because we call this the materialistic argument. It's all based on materialistic argument, and it is very deterministic. That means as if it is given, as if it is by birth, as if people are born with two hands and one head. That's a given. But imagine that there is variation in birth, that we have 2 heads, 3 heads, maybe 5 hands. There would be a variation. So realism says this is always the case. The neocon, the neoconservatism in the United States, they constantly say it's a realistic world, and they don't believe really in international relations and international organizations. So you have to weaponize, you have to be militarily ready. And that's what you see around the globe. And that's why other countries are actually angry at the United States, at the neocon, neo-conservative ideals, which doesn't really fit the world views that we have, because we also have the liberal views, ideas, and the constructivism, which we will be talking about in this course. So this is very materialistic. Materialistic means that there is no space for ideas, for character, for personality, for identity. So there is no variation. There is as if there is no conditions, because conditions could change. There are times that you need military, and there are times you don't need them. So it depends on the conditions, right? But in other contexts, ideas are important. In other contexts, identities are important, and there are values and norms, etc. So Organski tries to, point out that we should look from different various perspectives, but he's still trying to construct a theory. Let's move on. So Organski continues to discuss in this book what he thinks power is. So what is power? That's the biggest, that's the golden question. That's a $1 million question. He does this in a very discursive way. He's making interpretations and discursive. He says, well, is it wealth? Is it money? Is it the richest? And he says, well, no. It's not wealth. Power is not equal to wealth. Actually, he says there is a lot of confusion because wealth and power are jointly pursued most of the time by states, and that's why people think that wealth, if you're wealthy, you're also very powerful as a state. It doesn't really matter. You have the Netherlands. Netherlands is a very, very small country. It has a lot of impact. But would you say it's a powerful country? I mean, I wouldn't say that. It has influence, it has economic influence, but it's a very small country. I mean, we will see in a couple of slides, we will see a definition of power, of how Organski defines power, but it's not wealth, he says. Actually, if you have wealth, you can buy guns, you can buy weapons, you can buy butter. But even if you're very, very wealthy, if your national goal is to militarize and you keep on buying guns, you will not have money for butter, for bread, like in Soviet Union, because the money they had, they spent on space projects, on rocket science and nuclear weapons and hydrogen bombs, etc. So it impoverished the population. So where do you spend your money on? Even if you're very, very rich, it doesn't really mean that you're powerful, that you have power. So still on the question, what is power? Organski also argues that, this is another important point because, as you know, in the Western European countries have received a lot of immigrants. There was a lot of migration for economic reasons to work as a workforce in the industrial factories of Germany and the Netherlands, France, and you name them. And it says migration doesn't have to be bad, he says. But today, in this context, this is 1957, what Organski says. He says if a nation doesn't have the workforce and you don't have the time to convert farmers into laborers, what are you going to do? You're going to bring in people. And that's what Germany did, and that's what Netherlands did. Now we have populism. We will talk about that later. But immigration could solve the problem, but it has problems. Immigration is not always a very, very good solution because it makes a multicultural society, and culture could clash. Language. We will get there at some point in the future of our course. But he says, well, in 1957, immigration could have been a solution for those countries who lacked the capacity of workforce. So what is power? Let's read this text by Organski. But what is it that makes a nation powerful? He says the answer to this question is not so easy. One thinks of size. Size, how big is your country? how large is your country, size of nations that process great expanses of territory. So how big is the country? By a large territory peopled by a large and growing population. So he talks about population, size, geography, population. And one thinks of wealth, money, of nations that are rich in resources, that possess mighty industries, that are blessed with fertile land and good crops. One thinks of military strength of nations with modern armies and missiles and bombs. But none of these things alone gives power. This is interesting. So one by one, they're not power. But he gives an example. He says Brazil is a huge, nearly as large as the United States. Pakistan has a large population, larger than Germany's. Belgium is thoroughly industrial, and Switzerland has first-class army. Yet none of these are powers of the first rank. And then he makes a leap. He starts, if you just keep on going through this book, and I love this book, and he starts about China, and he says in the late 1940s, China possessed a large territory, the largest population in the world, and not much industry, right? So these people were farmers. So there was a a billion of people, but most of them farmers or unemployed, but a large army. They had, modern weapons, and they were especially given by the United States. They were just gift. Yet China was a great power by courtesy only. So, it was a big country. It had weapons, etc., but it wasn't as powerful as the United States. Right? So what's the difference between the United States and China at that point? She did not have a firm control of her own affairs at home. Remember a couple of slides ago, we talked about efficiency, the argument of efficiency. So this country was not able to use all these resources. And who uses these resources? Politics, right? The political regime. This is going to be very interesting at the end of this lecture. I hope we can continue, but if we cannot finish, we will finish it off next week, but we will do our best. In the early 1950s, China rose to the status of great power. In fact, factually, in realistic terms, as well as in name, her area had not changed. The population had not increased that much. Industrialization was still a dream of the future, and her armies were now supplied by the Soviet Union, a less generous ally than the United States. Yet China had become a major power. Her resources, land, people, and industry had not changed, but her use of them had. So what has changed? Nothing changed. It's still big. It's still the same population, but now the Chinese started to use these. See, that's the difference. That's the efficiency argument. They started to realize we should use the capacity that we have, and that makes a big difference. Mere possession of resources does not guarantee power. To confer power, to really have power, these resources must be used, and they must be used in a way as to influence other nations. So what is the definition of power? The definition of power is that a country, a nation, can make another nation do things even if they don't want to do it. So that's the influence. So that's kind of what Organski defines power. It's the ability to determine the behavior of other countries. If you don't have power, you cannot determine the behavior of another nation. But if you have the power, you can do that, obviously. So power then is the ability to influence the behavior of others in accordance with one's own ends. So if I have power over you and I want something, I tell you to do it and you do it, and that's, you behave in a way that I want you to behave, and that's power over you. That's in political sciences the definition of power, and you will come across this definition in most places. This is the most common definition of power. It may be large, so even if a nation is large, it may be wealthy, it may even be great, but it doesn't mean that it's powerful. So when you say the country is powerful, if the nation can make another nation do things, right? So the Netherlands is wealthy. It's a very wealthy nation. But when Italy said we want billions because of the corona, the Netherlands couldn't really convince them. I mean, the Netherlands and Germany had to give that money. Billions and billions of euro went to France and to Italy and to Spain. So it's not really power over other nations. And Italy said, well, if you don't give that money, I'm going to exit the European Union. That was a threat. And Italy has more power in that sense, getting others to behave in a way they want them. So you see, the very existence of power presupposes at least two individuals or groups having some kind of relation. So there must be a relationship for power to exist. So you want to influence the behavior, matter where they disagree. So there is something they agree or disagree. In this case, they disagree, and you have the ability to make me do things in a way that you want me to do. Okay. So now we have a definition of power, and there are instruments of power. So the instruments of power, Organski talks about these instruments as well. It becomes clear that the qualities we think of as conferring power, wealth, or resources, because if you ask someone on the street, what do you think that power is? They'll probably say, well, you have to be rich, you have to have resources, you have to have manpower, you have to have weapons. These are instruments of power, but if you cannot use these instruments, if you cannot utilize them, you don't become a great power. If you have a great army, but you cannot use your army, I mean, your own army is going to do a coup against you. I mean, there's this power. You cannot use that power. So if you really want to be able to say I'm a great power in international relations terms, you have to be able to, as a political regime, you have to be able to use these instruments. Okay, so and obviously influence the behavior of other nations. So they are only instruments of power. Which ones? Wealth, resources, manpower, and arms. And their effectiveness depends on their usage. In general, however, wealth is an instrument of power in addition to serving as a reward. For example, the Netherlands is a very rich country, and it can reward another country by giving money. There is only one nation in the world that gives free money, gift, and that's the United States. Until this time, because it's a powerful country. It used to be a very, very powerful country, but I mean, we're going to see that Organski made a prediction of today. So we will get to that. Just a little bit more patience. So, and in addition, serving as a reward, it can also be used to purchase something, right? So you can use it, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that you have power. So we may expect a shift in power. So if you go down there at the yellow highlights on this slide, you see that Organski says we may expect a shift in, this is 1957, don't forget that. Shift in power from the Soviet Union to China at some future date. So how does he make these predictions? On basis of the theory of modernization, on basis of efficiency argument, on basis of the power definition argument, and by making an index of some points that you can measure what power is. So he makes an index, he makes a measurement of he measures power of countries, and that's how he makes these predictions. He predicts that the Soviet Union is going to transfer its power, and at that point, Soviet Union is a communist regime and China is a communist regime. But China thinks and believes that it's a better communistic regime than the Soviet Union. So there is also competition between the Soviet Union and China. And it could have been a war between the Soviet Union and China in transferring that power. But in 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down and Russia became a semi-democracy, the state started to financially also help the Russians. And the only authoritarian, really pure communist regime remained China. And so this power transition did take place. He predicted, he was right at this point. But Russia still, it's normal that Russia will say, well, I'm still strong, and try to keep the reputation high, that its power manages to be able to save that. So it's important for your own reputation, right? But he says, well, China is going to become very powerful. That's his prediction here, and he was right. So what kind of exercising methods are there for nations? Well, you can persuade. There's persuasion is the easiest method. Yet you're trying to argument, if you want, as a strong nation, has influence on a weaker nation. So you persuade them, and this is voluntary. So the nation B says, okay, no problem, I will do this, I will try to make you happy. That's out of your free will, you comply with the demands and questions that are being asked to you. You just comply. The second one is rewarding. So United States used to give money to countries. You have the Marshall Plan, for example, to the European countries. It's conditional. It's free, but it's conditional. So Germany became, obviously after the Second World War, one of the most important democratic economic engines of the European Union. So it can reward by money. It can reward with other things. So there is a reward. And if you don't want to listen, there is punishment. So you could get punished. What is a good punishment? To not give you free money. Or not give you any loans. I'm not going to cooperate with you. There might be an embargo. Iran is, for example, a country that keeps being punished, right? Sanctions, exactly, very good. So there are being, there are sanctions, there are embargoes, but there's one more step, and that's using force, military action. In our, for example, the Vietnam War was a proxy war. Proxy war means war that United States is waging, but then not at home, but at a distant location. Actually, that was a war between, Russia, China, and the United States. And when you look at Syria, it's a proxy war, but in invasion of Iraq, for example, exactly in Iraq, there was actually other nations fighting with each other, right? So these are proxy wars. But the use of military force, invasion of Iraq is a very good example. You have George Bush 1, and Bush 2. Big difference between the two, because Bush 1, when he wanted to get Saddam out of Kuwait, he got the United Nations behind him. He said, well, all the members of the United Nations, all Middle Eastern Arab countries supported the decision of George, Bush 1 in this invasion, or in this war, but Bush 2 did not get the consent of United Nations. That's a big problem, and Middle Eastern countries did not support this. The invasion of Iraq. So it became a complicated issue, and the United States couldn't get out of Iraq. So kind of what Afghanistan was for the Soviet Union, Iraq became what was Afghanistan to Soviet Union to the United States. So Iraq was the battlefield where the United States actually lost its global superpower. Because the father, Bush, he said, well, I don't want to be a bully. I don't want to bully you, but I want to help you. And this person, Saddam, is invading Kuwait, so we need to help, right? So he got all the support, and it was, to help the people of Kuwait. But in the second case, there was no, they lost their respect, the international global respect, not their power. They still have this destructive military force, but they lost a lot of respect. And that's what happened around the globe. And you could say that was also the period that the United States started to lose its respect around the globe. It started to decay, actually. So you could use these instruments. Moving on. And then Organski says in the book, if you read it, he says, can we measure power? Are we able to measure power? And he keeps on talking about, geography, resources, population. And then he makes an argument. I'm going to move the population argument. This is very interesting. Meltem, maybe you did not expect this. Maybe you did, I don't know. But he comes up with this argument of population. So his model is based on, not on military power, not on anything else. He builds up his model on argument of efficiency and argument of population. And with population, he says, what we can talk about military, geography, location, topography. We can talk about all these aspects. These are instruments, wealth and everything. These are instruments for, but he says, when you talk about population, it's something else. He says, look at this slide. He says, we come to a resource whose claim as a determinant of national power rests on firmer ground. This is firmer. This is better, he says. Population is important. At a first superficial glance, so if you look at it superficially, the importance of a large population for the power of a nation seems obvious. All the great powers of today, 1957, have giant populations. There is not a single major power with a population under 50 million. On the other hand, all the dependent and powerless states are, very small, population-wise, small countries. And let's keep on going, because this is going to be interesting. I'm going to skip a couple of things because, there's the argument of efficiency again, and even if you have the industry, you have to be able to use it, right? So that's the argument. So you can have the resources but not industrialize. You can industrialize but not continue. So you have to have a very, very strong political bureaucracy, political regime, and a very strong bureaucracy that can arrange, regulate by law, by using laws and regulations and procedures, and increase the productivity of the country. So how are you using your resources? How are you using everything that is available to you? And that's the modernization theory, becoming efficient because of an efficient political leadership governance. And it says, and he just keeps on going, and he says, in his measurement index of power, he says there are three very important determinants. He says population size, that's one, political development and economic development. So population together with modernization theory is very, very, very important. And he says, well, I know that we have 10 more minutes, something like that. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to go quite fast through this, and I'm going to summarize next week most of this part again. But I want to give you something today that you can think about. So he says these are the most important things, right? Modernization theory together with population size. So the argument of population. If you take these three things, it actually says something about the gross, domestic product, GMP, and he says this is 1957, and GMP says something about how efficient a country uses its population. So how efficient is your population? It all comes down how you use your population, your workforce. See, and then he says there is going to be a power transition. And this power transition, let's read this. He says the Soviet Union, China, and India will rise in strength in the years ahead. Russia has already experienced most of the spurt of, at this moment, Russia is very strong. But just pay attention. Spurt of power that comes with rapid industrialization, but she will increase her power still further before her growth is spent. China has only recently entered the stage of transitional growth in power. If she recovers, and she did, successfully from the political chaos of the Cultural Revolution, her rise should be the most significant event of the next few decades. India has not started yet, but let's continue. China, her power is almost incalculable, with a population of some 700 million. This is 700 million in 1. Billion people. This is 700 million people workable. These are people who are ready to work. These are 700 million people who can work, right? So you have a population of the United States which is about 300 million, but the workforce is what is it? 100 million. Who can really work, because you have people who are old, young, and you name them. But 700 million people workforce, which will continue to increase rapidly as she industrializes. And the question is she going to industrialize? And she did. And her economy is diversified. It's not oil-cursed economy. It's not only one product. It's thousands of diverse products and a lot of people who can produce these goods. She's so large that with even a small improvement in her economic efficiency, she will pass Russia population at that point 230 million with ease, and she will eventually pass the United States as well. The question is not whether China will become the most powerful nation on earth, but rather how long it will take her to achieve this status. And boy, he was right in his prediction in 1957. So, and the next question is going to be, will there be war? When the United Kingdom, remember in the beginning of our lecture, I said the United Kingdom passed her global power to the United States, and that was peaceful because the United Kingdom and the United States are actually the same people. They share the common culture, language, and everything. So it was actually normal, acceptable to pass on the power to the United States, as the United States helped Europe during the First World War and the Second World War. So let's read this last slide and then we will end our lecture. For the West, chances of averting war with China rests on two slim options. First one is hopefully that China will not be able to modernize, so modernization theory. That political disorganization, they were at that point a little bit more disorganized, not efficient. They were not able to use their workforce and resources and wealth, and you name them. And there was an excessive rapid population, the poorest, one of the most poorest countries in the world. That was China. I was in China in last year in December. And they're very proud. The Chinese are very, very proud that they uplifted almost 1 billion people from poverty into wealth, into high standard of living, and that's amazing. That's amazing. And and so Organski says, hopefully they will not modernize, this seems unlikely. He says, well, they will probably modernize. If you consider, no, it didn't really influence. I was there in December, and I came back the 12th of December, 13, 14 December, and that was after 2 weeks after that. We heard about the corona crisis, about the virus, and then I came to Konya in January this year, and still there were not too many things on the corona, but the corona didn't really influence China, and there is a lot to say about the corona. Corona is a dangerous disease, yes, but it didn't really influence China. How funny is that? But you know, yesterday or the day before, there was a press conference. I will send you the link. You can watch it, and there is you know, the head of the FBI said China wants to leapfrog, you know, jump over us to become the super global power in the world by any means necessary. So they will really try their best to become the super global power. And look at what Organski said in 1957. He said, China will become the superpower. It's not if, it is just when. When will this happen? And because they have a huge population, only a small improvement of their economy is enough to surpass the United States. And he says, hopefully they won't modernize, they won't industrialize, but it will industrialize. And when they do, if China can complete her industrialization rapidly and hold off her challenge to Soviet Union and to the West until her superiority in power is clear to all, no war will be required. So the prediction is that there's not going to be a war, because the United States kind of declared a Cold War on China 2 days ago. They said there is a what they call the fox hunt. Allegedly that Chinese regime, the communist regime, sends people into America to threaten dissidents in the States. They you know, caught 6 Chinese people who entered the country, and it's a big war right now. So the Cold War has actually started, and he says if China can burst her peasants, her farmers, and rise to her full industrial strength, no power on earth will be able to stop her. Simply by industrializing, she can leave America far behind in any race for power. So this argument of population is important, and so nations will try to do, if they have a very smart political regime, the regime will try to use its population to produce, to be able to make that leap into powerful great nation. And right now, the Cold War has started. So this is going to be a very interesting upcoming 2 decades. In the next 20 years, it's going to be very, very interesting. I mean, look at this book. This is 1957. Interesting, isn't it? And a brilliant researcher, and his predictions did come out. So please do enjoy the book. This is a very interesting, good book to have in your on your bookshelf, in your collection. And let me know if you have any questions, Melta. I will go through most of this stuff again next week, but I just wanted to finish off the lecture because that's what we scheduled. We will start with new stuff next week, but I will obviously talk about this again and summarize some of the points.